Hello, everybody. So it's as you can see, it's pretty late in the evening here in the UK, but I had to, put this video out, and the video is of, as we do every day, of the State Department's press conference. And once again, there is this guy called Vedant Patel of Indian origin. He was holding the fort and trying to answer questions on Gaza. And as is the case every day, he shamed himself once again. You have to understand, why am I could have just put out the video, but there are few things that you have to keep an eye for, because those are the things that will give you the indication that just how shameless this organization is, and how shameless these individuals who are working as spokespersons for this regime are. I think it gives me a sense that one of the criterias, to appoint these kind of people as spokespersons must be just how shameless you can be. Your ability to outsmart each other in shamelessness is what will get you a job as spokespersons for these organizations. Otherwise, how can any individual be so bereft of humanity, so bereft of morality? So there were three moments that really caught my attention, and you have to keep an eye on those three moments. So one, while answering a question from a female journalist about the number of trucks that have entered Gaza in the last few days after Israelis destroyed and took control of Rafah crossing, what he said, that will really shock you. And he said with a straight face, he said, number of trucks that have entered today are 50. 50. There are 2.4 million people in Gaza, and number of trucks entering today is 50. Just imagine, try and picture 2.4 million people being fed and their interests being looked after by aid materials coming in 50 trucks. What did this shameless Biden and his administration say when the 7 foreign aid workers were killed? That they have taken a dim view of Israeli action, and now they will not tolerate anything less than 450 to 500 trucks entering Gaza every day. What happened to that pledge? 50 trucks. I'm not saying that. This idiot is saying that. This Vedant Patel of Indian origin is saying that 50 trucks entered Gaza with aid materials to cater the needs of 2.4 million people. Whenever he mentions Hamas, he has to use the harshest language. The terrorists, the brutal regime who killed a number of people. But when another female journalist, Nadia, reminds him about Israeli atrocities of forcing at least 400,000 people, 400,000 people being forced to relocate themselves once again from Rafah. First, they were asked to leave the North Gaza, come to Central Gaza, Gaza City, then Khan Yunus, and then come to Rafah camp. And now from Rafah, they are being asked to find a safer location once again, after Israelis have destroyed entire Gaza. 400,000 have been displaced. Can that be called war crimes? No. Can this be the moment for America to criticize Israel? No. Because this guy doesn't do that. You can see it. And then the third one, when poor Saeed, once again challenges him and asks him about his government's role, the US government's role in complicating this problem. That how in 2005, the then American establishment had promised that there will be an independent state in 1 year's time. Now it's been 20 years and nothing has happened. To which he tries to corner him by saying, are you saying that what happened on 7th of October is because of American government? Because that's a game they play. They have first described Hamas a terrorist organization so that you and I, if we are living in those countries, we cannot criticize the action. We cannot, if anything that you do in support of the liberation movement, you will be accused of pro-Hamas. So now, if you remind American establishment about their hypocrisy. They will say, oh, so are you saying that you're justifying that act of 7th of October? And are you saying that it's because of us? So with these three things in mind, I want you to watch today's press conference of the State Department.
You said yesterday that you were aware of reports of U.S. citizens unable to leave Gaza. Do you have an update on how many and any progress on that?
So I think specifically yesterday we were talking about the question as it relates to a group of American citizens who were doctors and medical professionals that have been stuck in Gaza since the closing of the Rafah border. So we're continuing to monitor that situation. We're aware of those reports. As I said yesterday, this isn't a border crossing that we control, but we are continuing to engage directly and actively with the governments of Israel, with the governments of Egypt, to advocate for their safe departure from Gaza. We believe that there is more that can be done here, and this is just another example of why it is so crucial and important that the Rafah border crossing be open, not just for the appropriate flow of humanitarian aid, but also for the safe departure for foreign nationals. I will also just want to use this opportunity to reiterate, our advice to U.S. citizens to heed our level 4 travel advisory warning as it relates to Gaza, given the fact that it is a region in armed conflict. The security environment within Gaza is extremely dangerous and volatile.
And then on the aid, do you have an updated number on aid trucks getting into Gaza, and how much has Rafah being closed impacted that?
So a couple things. First, I just want to say, as it relates to Rafah, the border crossing, we are continuing to do everything we can to ensure that the border crossing can be opened. Specifically, we're engaging with the governments of Israel, the governments of Egypt, to do so. When it comes to humanitarian aid, we are also specifically trying to do what we can to ensure that Kerem Shalom and other crossings are being utilized as a maximum throughput for some of this humanitarian aid. As it relates to aid that has been flowing this week, we've seen 50 trucks enter Gaza on May 12th. This is not nearly enough. More needs to be done, and it's another example of why the Rafah border crossing needs to be open so we can see further sustained humanitarian aid flow into Gaza.
Okay, and has the Israeli government been receptive on that? What's been their
response? So I talked a little bit about this yesterday. In order for the Rafah border crossing to reopen, we need to see operational and some security circumstances which would allow it to make it safe to do so, and we're continuing to have those conversations and engagements to make it so. But we continue to believe that it needs to be reopened as swiftly as possible.
And then has the U.S. finalized a deal with the UN to distribute the aid from the pier in Gaza? And where in Gaza will the UN take possession of the aid?
So as it relates to any role that the UN might play, I'd let my colleagues at the United Nations speak to that. And on the operational status of the JLOTs or the pier, I'll just let my Department of Defense colleagues speak to some of the operational updates.
So you can't say if a deal's been reached?
I don't have any updates for you on that. Back to
Sure.
John.
Back in Gaza. Still in Gaza. The Qatari Prime Minister today, I'm sure you saw his comments, but he was quite downbeat on the prospects for further negotiations and was blaming Israeli actions and words going into Rafah. I mean, do you still believe that talks are possible? Do you think is diplomacy ongoing on this?
So we continue to believe that a hostage deal is the best way to save the lives of the hostages, avoid a full-scale military operation where more than 1 million people are sheltering. And despite reports to the contrary, talks continue to be ongoing. And we're continuing to do everything we can to focus on getting these conversations done. Look, to take a step back, we've long said that a ceasefire that is coupled with a deal to release all hostages, one that is coupled with the additional flow of humanitarian aid, is something that can help create the space for additional diplomacy in the region.
And when you say talks are ongoing, does that mean like in virtual form or?
I'm just not going to speak to the specifics. Yeah.
Could I ask you one other thing about Gaza?
Sure.
There's some attention yesterday's statements by the Deputy Secretary regarding Israel. He was speaking in Florida, Kurt Campbell, saying that that Israelis talk of sweeping victory in the battlefield, total victory. I don't think we believe that is likely or possible. No, the day before, the Secretary Blinken, he said on one of the talk shows that that it's perhaps not possible for Israel to eliminate all of Hamas. Are they saying the same thing, or Deputy Secretary Campbell's remarks might have implied that perhaps there's not a possibility of victory in some form by Israel. Can you clarify what?
So what Secretary Blinken and also Deputy Secretary Campbell are talking about, to take a bit of a step back, the president and this administration have been clear that the U.S. wants to see Hamas defeated, and we want to see justice delivered as it relates to the perpetrators of the October 7th terrorist attacks. There can be no equivocation on that. But while, of course, military pressure is necessary, it is not the only sufficient thing to fully defeat Hamas. If Israel's efforts are not accompanied by a political plan for the future of Gaza, for the future of the Palestinian people, the terrorists will keep coming back, and Israel will continue to remain under threat, and we will continue to find ourselves in this continued cycle of violence. So what the Deputy Secretary are talking about, how Israel has a responsibility to connect their military operation to a clear strategic endgame about a holistic, integrated strategy to ensure the lasting defeat of Hamas and for a better alternative future for Gaza, one that is consistent with the principles that the Secretary laid out in Tokyo. We're talking about things like a Gaza reunited under the Palestinian Authority, a Gaza that is not under the control of Hamas and can no longer be a springboard for terrorism against the Israeli people. And we are talking about a region that, in our hope, has a negotiated two-state solution that is reflective of the will of the Israeli and Palestinian people. That's what we're talking about here.
I've some things on other topics, but I imagine.
Sure, I'll work the room. Said, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. Here I have a copy of my newspaper exactly 20 years ago, the 13th of May, 2004. And in it, I have my full interview with the then National Security Advisor, Condoleezza Rice, in which she says, maybe by next May, 2005, we'll have a Palestinian state. And, the irony is I was probably here that day asking Richard Boucher about it later on. And the irony is, had the United States kept come through on its promises, we would not have October 7th. We would not have any of the dozen wars that
are you trying to imply
that Israel had waged on the Palestinians. And I'm asking you, do you ever exercise introspection? Do you look back and say, all this wreckage, all these problems, all these vetoes that you cast, all these no's at the UN, including last Friday, was it wise?
Said, I hope that you are not trying to imply that somehow the United States is responsible for October 7th. Because there was only one perpetrator of the October 7th terrorist attacks,
that is not exactly
Hamas.
my point. That is not my point.
That doesn't sound like the question that you're asking.
No. My question to you, do you ever reflect on all the promises that you guys have made, administration after administration after administration, reiterating its commitment to the two-state solution, and you've never come through on that? Do you ever reflect on that? That is
Said, we are working tirelessly to make it so. It is this exact reason that the Secretary has been engaging in the shuttle diplomacy that he has, taking an unprecedented 7 trips to the region to engage directly with Israeli officials and others in the region on getting a ceasefire, on getting a hostage deal, on getting additional humanitarian aid, so we can get to a place where the conditions are created for some additional diplomacy to happen, to get us to a two-state solution, to get us a region that is reflective of the principles that the Secretary laid out in Tokyo, to get us to a region that is not caught up in this same cycle of violence.
Mm-hmm. Well, let me ask a couple more questions, sure. If you allow me. Yesterday you talked about human shields and how Hamas embeds itself and so on. Well, there's a report today or yesterday on how Hamas used, how Israel, the Israeli occupation army, used Palestinian teenagers as a human shield. I wonder if you're aware of the report and if you have any comment on it.
So I've seen those reports, Said, and we're looking into these as well as other allegations. And you've heard me state repeatedly, and you've heard Matt and the Secretary say it also, Israel and any country has an obligation to thoroughly investigate credible allegations of violations of international humanitarian law. I don't have any other updates on this specifically, though.
Yeah, and lastly, yesterday somebody said something about the number of Palestinians dead and so on, and the United Nations came out and corrected that. I hope that you're aware of this report.
So I've seen that, Said, and I will just echo what you heard me say yesterday, that the bigger issue here is that thousands of innocent civilians have been killed. Any number above zero is heartbreaking, it's tragic, and it is reflective of more needing to be done to mitigate civilian harm. Nadia, go ahead.
Thank you, Vedant. As we speak now, there's almost 400,000 people forced to leave their homes from Rafah with no shelter, no food, no fuel, and no safe place to go. So how could this be different than your insistence, the administration insistence, that we have to see a viable plan to evacuate people? Because you're doing it incrementally. What's the difference between moving 500,000 people as we speak today? We don't know if they're going to move more later on. But basically, they're doing it on stages. So what difference for you from the position you were till now? The consequences are the same, aren't they?
So, Nadia, when we talk about a Rafah operation that we would take issue with, we're talking about an operation that is major, that is a direct invasion into Rafah, that is targeting and invading into the urban and dense centers. Again, I will leave it to the IDF to speak to their own operation. We have yet to see a major operation into Rafah, but the concerns and criticisms that we have, those continue to persist, and it's something that we are going to continue to work at with our partners in Israel. These are conversations that are ongoing, and to date, this operation has not happened in large part due to the ongoing conversations that we've been having with the Israelis. And again, just absent a credible plan to get civilians out of harm's way, we've been clear that this is not a major military operation we'd support.
But isn't forcing 500,000 people to move, forcing them to move out of Rafah to a nowhere, whereas nowhere is safe, isn't it by itself a violation of international law?
So we have been pretty clear, Nadia, that there can be no forcible relocation of the Palestinian
What if they
people.
stay? They're going to die. They're moving because they have to move.
That continues to be a tenet of our approach. But ultimately, we do support efforts to support Israel's goal of dismantling Hamas. But like I said, we do not want to see a major operation into Rafah, and we have not seen one yet that we would take issue with. Okay. We're continuing to have those conversations with our partners in Israel, though.
Okay, two quick questions.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the UN worker who was killed yesterday, the UN said that they clearly communicated to Israel where they're moving, the exact movement, and yet one UN worker was killed. And that will bring the total to almost 250. So you still believe that Israel is not targeting aid worker, considering what happened yesterday with the clear communication and what happened with the World Central Kitchen?
So the reports from yesterday evening, Nadia, are incredibly disturbing, and we are very concerned by what we're seeing of the reported strike on a UN vehicle in Gaza that killed one aid worker and injured another. You've heard me say this before, you've heard the Secretary say it, UN and humanitarian workers must be protected, and they need to be able to continue their life-saving work, and we join calls for a full investigation into this incident. I will also say that in these kinds of circumstances, a viable medical evacuation process for humanitarian staff injured in military operations, accidents, or illness is also essential. I will also say around the specifics of this incident, we continue to be in contact with our partners to understand what transpired and how this happened. We still don't have the full details, Nadia, but we expect Israel to follow through with the new IDF coordination cell for real-time humanitarian efforts. And we emphasize that there needs to be a focus on safeguarding designated sites, safeguarding aid personnel and civilians, and we urge Israel to expedite the deconfliction cell full operationalization, which we have not seen that yet.
Okay, and finally, just to follow up what you told Saeed, you said that the administration worked effortlessly to establish a Palestinian state, and you give an example of the Secretary's visit to the region.
We are working. This is something we are
towards that.
working towards.
Sure,
It's something that
working
we
towards
remain
that.
deeply focused on, and has been something that I know is a goal of this secretary's and a goal of this president's.
I haven't answered my question
Yeah.
yet. So, can you tell us before October 7, what exactly the administration did to make sure that the two-state solution is viable and they're working on it?
Nadia, I'm happy to follow up with a clear list of actions that we've taken. But if you just want to look at the focus on this before October 7th, you've heard the Secretary talk about this previously before. Before the October 7th terrorist attacks, many of you were aware the Secretary was intending to go to the region. He had a trip scheduled to visit Israel, to visit the West Bank, to visit Saudi Arabia and some other countries to talk about these very issues, to talk about the issue of normalization, to talk about the issue of Israel's further integration in the region, one that we hoped could be coupled with a two-state solution, one that could be coupled with serious progress for the Palestinian people. Obviously, this brutal terrorist attack by Hamas on the Israeli people derailed some of those efforts in the immediate term. But that is something we continue to remain focused on, and that is why you saw the Secretary almost 6 months ago in Tokyo lay out some clear principles of what the day after this conflict needs to look like, and what we expect to see from our partners in Israel, from our partners in the Palestinian Authority, and other partners in the region.
Thank you very much for watching this video. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.